Hey there, Vernacular Faithful. Redcoat here. And I'm back after a long sabbatical from doing gaming stuff. And then part of it is just I've been hyper busy trying to figure out ways to make good money outside of building projects and stuff. But I wanted to address a particular thing that I've encountered in many corporate and client-based settings, and that is the concept of the NDA. Now, for a lot of people in business, in the creative business, and really just in business in general, there's an assumption that if you're going to do creative work, or if you're going to do work that requires a lot of input from workers, you absolutely positively need to have an NDA. You need to have a non-disclosure agreement. And the reason that this assumption is there, at least by my conjecture, let's say, is to protect company secrets and also to manage your hype bennies, to make sure that you don't spend all of your hype too early. With somebody leaking information about this or leaking something about that. You have that situation where, say, the game's in a poor state and somebody releases a part of the game in that state, and now the public view of the game is in this very negative space because they got an incomplete product, and you have to then backpedal to work against that. So that's the reason for an NDA. Now, to my mind, as someone who's run my own game company for a while and has also worked for a couple of tech companies over the years and worked for a few creative clients, I personally feel that an NDA is counterintuitive to anyone who's small time working in the independent space. Now, small time sounds diminutive, but you could also say independent. The reason why I say this is it's multifold. The first thing is from a standpoint of the person coming to be hired by you. Let's say they come to you and they're trying to build up their experience, they're trying to build up their portfolio. They're looking for a project that they can say, hey, I did this on that. It was super cool. And you should hire me because my skill is on display. So, what does a non disclosure agreement do to them? It says, it says, maybe not in no uncertain terms, but it implies that any work that they've done on the project cannot be shared unless the company says so. This could even mean that if the project gets released, they can't actually share the work that they did on it. Now, usually non-disclosures aren't quite that ridiculous. Usually, it's if the project releases, you can share stuff and show what's going on. But regardless, not everybody's going to read the fine print. They're going to look at all of those words on there and worry that they might get sued for sharing that ultra cool character that they designed in level 2. Now, there's another part to this, which is that a NDA implies that anything that happens within the company stays in the company, kind of like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So, if the company abuses you, doesn't pay you, forces you to work extra hours through some ultimatum, you don't get to say anything about that. Now, this is different from a non disparagement clause, which would basically say you can't say anything bad about the company at all, which that is something that exists. and is kind of evil from when used in the corporate setting. The NDA, if anything, the non-disparagement clause is an extension of the NDA. Now, the NDA can be interpreted in such a manner where if you say something about a negative working condition, that could be taken as grounds of a lawsuit because you were legally told that you can't do that. Now, whether or not that is actually a legal thing to do is beside the point. There's a lot of fine print on there and a lot of lawyerese that can be interpreted one way or the other. And they have a lot more money to buy a lawyer that is willing to do that. Now that's on the corpo side, mind you. So thinking about the NDA from this angle, one could understand why when somebody comes to a company, and there is like one more aspect that I would want to go into on this, but one could understand why when somebody comes to a company to get hired, when an NDA is presented, they immediately press X to doubt. Now, there's one other thing that comes with this, right? Which is uh, that idea of sharing your stuff, and I already talked a little bit about that. But the let's say the project doesn't finish. A lot of non-disclosure agreements do end after the project finishes, but if the project doesn't finish, you're in this limbo that if you didn't read the fine print, which a lot of people don't, you don't know if you can share the stuff that you worked on for the project. You don't know if posting something into your portfolio that you worked on over the course of a 2 year employment will result in a lawsuit. Like the best you could do in that scenario is say, I worked on that game, and say your position. You might not necessarily be able to share the art. Now, again, the fine print might say that you do have an allowance for that, but like I said, very few people are actually going to be reading that. So, from an employee standpoint, you get this uncertainty where it's like, well, am I setting up a trap for myself when I want to get hired somewhere else when this project doesn't finish? If this project doesn't finish, and I can't share any of the stuff that I worked on, like I, I have worked with an artist that has been in that particular situation on multiple occasions where they do excellent work, some of the best stuff I've ever seen. Um, and the project doesn't come out, and we can't release any of it. Like the best we can do is release whatever was given the go ahead, but the rest of it just stays on the back burner. And we'd have to risk some sort of legal action to actually share that information and get the guy the job he deserves. So that's a um, that's a faux pas that I personally am not a fan of. And I think it's something that anybody that wants to run a game company, anybody that wants to do game development or wants to work with other creatives needs to consider when they're writing up their contracts and figuring out what they want to do and how they want to manage their team. So, to my mind, there's one other loss that you get when you do an NDA, particularly one where either you embed what is possible to share and what isn't possible to share in the fine print, or some element of what can be shared is unclear. And this is specifically something that harms you as an independent. So, as an independent, every share matters. Every bit of publicity that you can get matters. So, you might not necessarily have the money to hire a publicist initially starting out, or a social media manager or other thing, which means that it's on you as the company owner, or some other, or wearing a bunch of different hats to actually get the word out there that, hey, stuff is happening on this project, we're doing this, this is happening, these guys are doing cool stuff. So that becomes your responsibility, particularly if you set up an NDA where you absolutely need to not only put out the product and say that, hey, this stuff is happening, you need to say, bro over here did this, bro is awesome. So that they know in no uncertain terms that when the project either fizzles or is released, they can share their work. But beyond that, um, there's also this angle of building up your brand and building up name recognition for your product. Now, the thing is, if you're in the independent space, you don't have ad bucks to spend. What you have is time and attention grabbing. One of the easiest ways to grab attention is to tell the story of your development. Basically, either doing a dev log or or doing regular updates on different things. And as you go along, and people latch on to your story, and they also latch on to what it is you're trying to make, and some of them really value it a lot and become super fans. That's how you start building the momentum to get your sales out there. Now, one of the things that will hamstring you there is if none of your teammates are able to talk at all about your project. Because if you've decided to take on the role of social media manager for your own project, you're only one person. And ideally, you want the whole of your team to actually be pulling a little bit of weight there. And the most natural thing for someone to do when they're working on a project is to share the cool stuff that they're doing. If you've got an NDA in play, they can't do that, and that's one less bit of publicity that you have for your project. Now, like I said, there's still that hype bennies thing where you have to pick and choose how you spend your hype. But with that in mind, that is more relevant if you already have a recognizable brand. If you already have a recognizable brand and people are going to be looking for your stuff, then you can pick and choose when you drop the hype. When you go, hey, take a look. We got some cool stuff ready for you. If people are looking for it, then you can pick and choose when you drop it. If people aren't looking for you, you have to start early and you have to start building up that audience over time. Just doing a hello, the game is at beta, we're ready to go, and you have 0 to maybe 100 people following you. I mean, you're not going to get many sales, just off the rip. Not unless you've got one killer app of a game. But you might not know that off the top. And having the game exposed earlier on in development and letting people walk through the process with you as you develop it is it's not a bad idea. Now, granted, it means that they're going to see some of the ugly, but that adds to the authenticity of it. And we live in an internet that very much values authenticity. If you show that, hey, we made some mistakes and this thing broke here and holy crap, this was really hard to do, people will value that, and they will also value the effort that you're putting into there and the honesty that you're giving. Because one of the things with any brand, one of the things you trade on is trust. So that's just a little big thing there. And that rolls us all the way back to that concept of the NDA. Because as a brand, you're not just building trust with your customers, you're also building trust with your contractors and your employees. I say both because they are handled differently, but there's a lot of stuff with that, and I can talk a little. I've talked in the past about um, poor form when working with contractors and things like that, and I can go into more detail in a different thing at a later point. But the point is, you're building trust not just with your customers, but with your employees and your contractors. You want the people that you worked with on your first project, particularly the ones that really showed their stuff and were exemplars in their fields, you want them to come back. You want them to want to come back. You want them to love the environment that you've had them working in. You want them to feel comfortable to do the stuff that they want to do, and you want them to feel like with you they can shine. An NDA gets in the way of that. An NDA muddles that territory unless you're very clear and very exacting about what that NDA does and does not mean. And in my opinion, you should just keep it simple and not do one. Um, you can basically just work off of the trust. You can work off of the trust of, hey guys, we're working on this right now, and I don't want to show anything until we got something ready. And I know it sounds rough to do that as an informal statement as opposed to a verbal agreement as opposed to an NDA. But the reason why you would want to do it that way is because this is also an evaluation on your end as a business person. With the contractor, if you told them that this is in confidence, we can't, this is something that we don't want to get out just yet. If they let it out, well, you know that they're a big mouth. They let things out when they want to, and that will influence whether you hire them again. Now, that said, like I said before, authenticity is a big thing that you're trading in here. The more secrets you keep, the less authentic you are, the less authentic you appear. So, the more contractual secrets you instantiate, and even the more verbal agreements that you create that stop people from talking about a project at any particular time, the less trust you will have with your customers and the less trust you will have with your employees and contractors. And that lack of trust between your employees and contractors will break out into the customer base because that basically counts as a mishandling and an abuse of them. Now, yeah, I mean that's just kind of how that lays out. And as we know, the internet can amplify things to the level where they just kind of destroy you. So I personally think that playing with an NDA is playing with fire, personally. Um, and I've had my own negative experiences with it, which I've explained a little bit, but uh, that's where I stand on the concept. And I think there are points where you might want to do that, particularly if you are a larger company. That that makes a certain amount of sense. If you're dealing with corporate espionage, people want people to steal your company's secrets. But to be honest, in the era of the internet that we live in right now, any company secret you have is gonna be out there eventually, and that's just kind of how it is. Like leaks will happen. Information will be proliferated at different times. So you just have to be you got to be careful about it if you're gonna use an NDA. And like I said, this is something that I think the NDA is something that I think applies more to a large scale company than necessarily a small scale one. And even with the large scale companies, it still can inculcate a a level of distrust that is harmful in the future. Now, that's pretty much what I have to say on the concept of NDA. And hell of a thing to come back in on, I suppose. We'll see if I post more regular stuff, if I have other things to comment on as far as running a game business and the like. But that's all I have for now. Thank you for listening, and play the games you want to play, boyos. This is Redcoat, signing off.